Okay. First of all, thank you. My name is Chuck Wade. I'm going to talk a little bit about a survey that we conducted starting about April of last year, so a little bit over a year ago. This was done for the Cape Cod Economic Development Council. Felicia Penn was our sponsor, and we actually had a lot of fun doing this because what we got to do was go through all 15 towns and take a solid look at what do they have in the way of communications and information technology infrastructure, how are they using it, how are they applying it, what kinds of problems and issues do they have. And what we did was we brought all this information back together, and this is now a resource available to the county for future planning. So the real objective was to facilitate planning. Planning not only at the county level, but also at the individual community level. A school or a town could use this information for their own purposes, could use this information to look at what other people are doing and how they compare or what lessons they could learn from a neighboring town or a neighboring school. It could also be used regionally. 2 or 3 towns get together to try and do something, whether it be a water system or a new regional school. They're able to use this information to do that kind of planning, and of course it'll also be used for county-wide initiatives. We want to provide information that can be not only maintained, but aggregated and kept moving forward. So what we did was we assembled all the information that we gathered into spreadsheets that have been turned over to the county. We also put together a comprehensive report summarizing all the lessons we learned and some of the insights and observations we picked up doing this. I understand that report will actually be up on the CCEDC website in the next day or two, so you might be able to pull that down. I've got a couple of copies if people want to just scan through it. The one point I need to emphasize, the caveat here, is that whenever you collect information of this type, you're getting a snapshot in time. And so things change. We've already seen a lot of things change. So the information that we gathered has a life cycle to it, and some of that information will erode fairly quickly. Other information will be consistent for quite some time. One of the things that we had to do is we had to figure out what were the sites of interest. We started out with a list of about 250 that we could find through public sources. When we got through, we had identified over 315 sites of interest for all of the towns and school systems and water districts and things of that nature for all of the 15 towns on Cape Cod. We actually physically surveyed almost 210, 211 of those sites. We actually went to them, took pictures, looked at the information, gathered data about what was at those sites, figured out what the sites were used for, found out where they actually are as opposed to where Google would tell you where they were. So did all that. So everything was geocoded. That information, again, has been made available to the county. It can be put into GIS databases. You can look at it through Google Earth, things of that nature. One of the things that's really important is, since we're doing this for the towns of Cape Cod, it's important to emphasize how important local governments really are. In fact, in the 21st century, we're learning how to do without the federal government because it's become so dysfunctional. And yet, you know, schools and roads and the water systems of the local communities continue to work. We have to have local communities. They're extremely important to all of our well-being. However, towns and schools are geographically fixed. They can't relocate to optimize operations like a business can. Growth is no longer an option for most communities, so economies of scale can be difficult to achieve. Towns do have significant assets, especially rights-of-way and facilities, but also, very importantly, staff expertise. People who know the local community, know how things work, who've been around for a long time. And that's one of the things we observed over and over again, was that many of the people who work for your towns have been there for a long time. They really know their environment well. The challenge is how to leverage these local assets to offset the local constraints. And this is where Open Cape comes in, because it is a game changer. It is a regional communications backbone that will interconnect all these islands of municipal or school networks. It takes them beyond the jurisdictional boundaries they operate in. It provides new flexibility to relocate information systems and achieve economies of scale that really were previously available only to the largest communities. So a community like Truro out in the Outer Cape or Lower Cape can have access to assets that previously would have only been available to some of the largest communities in the state. Open Cape can be a stimulus to assure that the local economy benefits from robust communications and provide access to the global economy. That's been discussed at several points already. It also brings greater diversity to regional communication services, which complements the offerings of the incumbent players, Verizon, Comcast, as well as some of the other competitive providers. The open access aspect of this, it's keeping the communications infrastructure robust. The reason the survey was valuable is because it's providing the fuel for planning. There's already been several discussions. Leslie talked about the importance of planning for this region and all the issues and challenges that are faced there. And that it's not just planning for highways or economic development or water systems, it's holistic planning. We've provided, through the survey, one other set of information that can be used for planning. It will help clarify the scale and scope of the challenges and illuminate opportunity, such as what Open Cape can do. There are a lot of planning efforts underway already. The Regional Emergency Communications Center planning is one that I would highlight as one that's going to be very significant and have a very significant dependency on communications resources. Water and wastewater treatment initiatives not only might depend upon information resources, but they could be vehicles for deploying conduit for fiber that is not up on poles where it's vulnerable but is underground. Regional school districts, transportation projects are all examples of projects that could benefit but could also contribute. Strategic planning needs to take a holistic approach that integrates these communications and IT resources into the overall fabric of the community. So what were some of the headlines from our survey? First of all, we found highly qualified IT staff, as one might expect, constrained and challenged by those constraints. Opportunities for cost savings can be found, but not necessarily where you might have first thought they would be. Applications matter a lot, and I'll talk about that. They are also the source of higher than expected costs. The current infrastructure and systems are pretty old, not too surprising given the economic situation, but there are some other factors that have contributed to aging infrastructure. Public safety initiatives can provide some leadership, simply because they've got to get out there and make some changes. They've got some of the oldest infrastructure. The future is wireless, but landline is still essential. So having a new fiber plant is going to be extremely valuable to the region. So IT staff does it all. And this picture, I think, really gets across the point that the people who are dealing with IT in your towns have to deal with everything. They're dealing with 30-year-old key systems for voice communications or PBXs. They're dealing with town networks. They're dealing with security problems. They're dealing with servers and PCs. As one IT director from one town pointed out, if it plugs in and breaks, I get to fix it. So these are very dynamic people. They're doing a lot for you. They're kind of, the heroes that you don't see a lot of, but we were very impressed with all the people we met. And I think that's an extremely important message to get across, not only within the towns, but also with the school systems. We saw some people who are very innovative, very creative, very effective at dealing with the constraints that they face. When we talk about costs, recurring costs matter the most because communities have, these are the costs that eat into the tax base. Labor is still the most important source of costs. It is the largest item in everybody's budget. Just the costs of health care increases have been sucking up a lot of the Prop 2.5. So it's a very significant source of recurring costs. When we look at IT is only about 2 to 5% of the budgets of the communities. And even in there, you'll find that labor is probably the largest component of that cost. Next is applications. Applications represent the largest non-labor cost category. We found in our survey surprising diversity. Over 156 vendors providing services or applications to the towns. Over 238 distinct applications. And by the way, we had a real problem getting all this data, in part because of the point above, which is there's still too much reliance on paper within the towns and communities. Paper is information, but you can't get at it easily. And so a lot of the information we were looking for, we discovered, was on paper. And that was a problem for our survey, but I think it's an indication of a much larger problem that applications can actually be a key vehicle for dealing with. We tried to get an accurate estimate of what the total application costs would be on a regional basis. We got a partial answer. I think if we were to project out based on what we understand, we're looking at somewhere between $3 to $5 million as an annual cost for all the 15 towns and school systems. Communication services. There's traditional telco, wireless voice and data, and internet services. They're important cost elements, but they are by no means a major cost element for any of the communities. System maintenance is another element, and town networks are surprisingly cost effective. The costs are modest, the benefits are quite considerable. All right, now I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but if you go with the old metaphor, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum to put it on, I could lift the world. That's to a certain extent the challenge that IT is facing. There are a lot of constraints, a lot of issues, but it is leverage. Local systems and businesses have never been more empowered to participate in local government than they are today. Gains in productivity driven by IT have helped municipalities manage with ever tighter budgets relative to the costs. So costs are going up, budgets are flat. IT has been the magic sauce that's made that happen. Applications matter most. Not only are they the most significant non-labor cost component, but, and this is the important point, applications are the vehicle by which we get all the benefits. The reason we have networks and PCs and servers is not because those are neat things to have, but because they support applications. Applications are what deliver the value. Applications are the drivers of productivity. They provide new capabilities and information-rich assets, and they provide democratization of information within a local government context. And I'll come back and say it again, perhaps the biggest challenge for the towns of Barnstable County is getting rid of that paper, because it's a significant hurdle that if you overcome that, there will probably be a lot of benefits coming down the road. So I mentioned old infrastructure. There's a lot of that, and there are many reasons for it. The top left is an old key system. That's some of these systems that look like this or could be 30 years old. Generators that look like some from the same era as Model T trucks. On the right, the top and bottom are pictures of public safety radio systems. These are, in many cases, really old. Again, 30 years in some cases. The primary public safety radio system used on the Cape is an 800 megahertz simulcast system. It was purchased, or many of the components were purchased, used from the 1996 Olympics. So it's pretty old. And there are a lot of reasons why it isn't necessarily just budget issues, but there are a lot of technology and other factors leading to some of the stuff being old. The lower center picture is a radio console that works really great, but it's quite old and not supported anymore. These are some of the issues, some of the reasons why there's a regional emergency communication center planning effort underway to try and deal with some of these issues in a comprehensive manner. And then you have servers, and servers won't be as old as some of these other systems, but still a server that's 5, 6, 7 years old running Windows 2003 instead of the latest, or in some cases Windows 2000 still. Those represent problems, challenges for the communities to overcome. So I mentioned that there's an RACC project, Regional Emergency Communications. This is somebody else's system. This might be what yours looks like when it gets built out. But it's a place where they're going to consolidate 911 and other dispatch operations. And doing so is going to place a lot of challenges on communications. OpenCape will probably be an important asset for this. A lot of ways to leverage the region as a whole and engage everybody in the planning for this. Just very quickly, I could spend the rest of the day talking about the challenges of communications interoperability. I'll just quickly say this is an area that we've known has been a problem for a long time. Progress has been disappointingly slow. It continues to be slow. But it is everybody's problem, and interoperability is an issue that affects all players and needs to be thought of again as a regional initiative. A coordinated strategy is really essential for the Cape and Islands, and again, I think there's going to be some overlap with the planning around the RACC. Very quickly, we have traditional telephone services. They're old. Guess what? The telephone company has been investing in that copper plant for the last 20 years. In some parts of the Cape, it's really pretty poor. And there's a lot of these kinds of circuits and telephone services out there. There are internet services. Comcast is the predominant provider, not the only provider. There's a bit of competition there. Cellular wireless services, there's a lot more competition, but Verizon Wireless is still the dominant player. We have the land mobile radio systems used by public safety, but also DPWs, school buses, lots of other players. And we have the town-owned or town-controlled networks. Some towns are using Comcast iNets. Those are very effective. Other towns have been using microwave, and that's been extraordinarily effective and extraordinarily cost-effective. So those are the assets, the communications resources that are out there. And OpenCape, in many cases, is providing complementary services to alternative voice services or alternative internet services or other ways to deploy cellular wireless. One of the things that OpenCape is doing is getting fiber to some of the high sites. These are high sites owned by the municipalities. So on the far right is on the far left, your left, is the Harwich water tower. The mast in the center is the Truro Public Safety Tower, which is also hosting a lot of cellular operators. And on the right is the new Wellfleet water tower. These are the kinds of facilities OpenCape is bringing fiber to. Those water towers are the best microwave and public safety radio facilities you could ask for. If a hurricane takes those down, there is no Cape. So they're really excellent resources, and this is something that by working together, you're going to be able to achieve some phenomenal opportunities to extend capabilities and build a more resilient network, which is really the essential ingredient for a region like this. This is just a quick thing that we did just to point out some of the unique advantages that the Cape has. This is a survey, or this is a tool that plots radio coverage. And all we do is we just plugged in the high sites, the towers, that OpenCape is going to. We use 700 megahertz because there are a lot of people talking about 700 megahertz. Only the red is where you do not have signal, and the gray is outside of bounds. Yellow, you can actually still use the services. The green and the blue is good. One of the other key elements to this is if you look at the Cape, and you're sitting here in Hyannis, you have interference coming from the east and the west, but not too much from the north and south. If you're in Truro, you might have a little bit of interference coming from Provincetown, probably not much from the south, and you got no interference coming from the east and the west. So the Cape is almost the ideal environment to build a wireless system. So you could think of building the unwired Cape. But just remember, to do that, you're going to still require fiber because you've got to tie all these sites together. And so I'm going to leave at that point, and thank you. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, there's my number, and we'll look forward to talking with you.